My wife said, "I'm HIV positive, been hiding it for years." I said, "I know." Then I showed her my negative tests from last week. Her affair partner wasn't so lucky. I, 44 male, am writing this from my study, a room that has felt more like a command center than a personal space for the last 3 months. The silence in the house is absolute, a stark contrast to the storm that's been raging in my life. It began on a Tuesday night, a night so mundane it's now seared into my memory as a cruel joke. My wife, Sarah, 41, and I were finishing a quiet dinner. 10 years of marriage had settled us into a comfortable, if somewhat predictable, rhythm. We were successful, respected, the kind of couple people envied. I was a partner at a financial consulting firm. She ran a moderately successful interior design business. We had the house, the cars, the life we'd planned, but a subtle disconnect had been growing for the better part of a year. I'd attributed it to work stress, to the gentle erosion of time. I was a fool. She pushed her plate away, her hands trembling slightly. "Mark," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "I have to tell you something. I'm so sorry." My mind raced through the usual suspects. She'd overspent, she'd scratched the car, she was unhappy and wanted to find herself. I braced myself for a difficult conversation. I was not prepared for the abyss. "I'm sick, Mark," she said, tears welling in her eyes, a carefully rehearsed performance of devastation. "I went for some tests. I'm HIV positive, and I've known for a while. I've been hiding it." The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. This was it, the confession, the tragic, life-altering secret that was supposed to break me, to bind me to her in a twisted tableau of sickness and sympathy. She was playing the victim card, a trump card she believed was unbeatable. She expected shock, tears, and embrace, a promise that we'd face this together. I felt a profound, chilling calm settle over me. I looked at her, really looked at her, and the woman I married was gone. In her place was a stranger, a reckless and cruel stranger who had been willing to gamble with my life. I took a slow sip of water. "I know," I said. Her head snapped up. The tears stopped, replaced by sheer, unadulterated shock. This was not in her script. What did you say?" "I know you're positive," I repeated, my voice level, devoid of the emotion she craved. "I've known for 3 months." I reached into the briefcase I'd set by the dinner table, a pre-planned move for a confrontation I knew was inevitable. I pulled out a folder and slid it across the polished wood. Inside, nestled in plastic sleeves, were 2 documents. 6 months ago, I began, my voice turning colder, more clinical. I started feeling off. Fatigue, night sweats, swollen glands. My doctor ran a full battery of tests. He's a thorough man. He recommended a full STI panel just to be comprehensive. I thought it was absurd. We were married after all. I pointed to the first document. It was a lab report dated 3 months prior. My name was at the top. Next to HIV-1, HIV-2 antibody antigen combination assay, the result was clearly printed. Non-reactive. Negative. My test came back negative. I continued, watching the color drain from her face. But my doctor's questions lingered. He'd seen these symptoms before. My mind started working. If I was negative but having symptoms that could be associated with seroconversion illness, and you were my only partner for a decade, a horrifying possibility began to take shape. The possibility that my body was reacting to repeated exposure from a positive partner. She was speechless, her mouth slightly agape. "So I stopped sleeping with you. Completely. I made excuses. Work stress, fatigue. You didn't seem to mind. I started paying attention. I saw the late-night texts you thought you were hiding. The credit card bill with charges for hotel bars I'd never been to. The weekend spa trips with the girls that didn't quite add up." I tapped the second document in the folder. It was another lab report dated last Tuesday, 1 week ago. "I got tested again last week after 3 months of total celibacy, just to be certain. And look at that." I slid the paper directly in front of her. Still negative, unequivocally negative. I leaned back in my chair. "So you see, Sarah, your confession isn't a tragedy. It's an admission of guilt. You didn't get this from me. And because I am still, by some miracle, negative, it means I never got it from you. You've been having an affair. You contracted HIV from your lover, and you knowingly, repeatedly, and maliciously exposed me to a deadly virus for years, only choosing to confess now that you can no longer hide your own symptoms." The silence was deafening. Her carefully constructed world of lies had just been dismantled, piece by piece, with documented proof. His name is David, isn't it? I asked, a final, brutal twist of the knife. David Miller, your old college friend who conveniently moved back to town last year. The flicker of sheer panic in her eyes was all the confirmation I needed. Pack a bag, I said, standing up from the table. You have 1 hour. Then you will leave this house. All future communication will be through my lawyer. Her name is Miss Evans. I retained her 2 months ago. You'll be hearing from her tomorrow. She finally broke, a torrent of desperate denials and accusations. I was cruel. I was heartless. I was a monster. I had spied on her. How could I do this when she was sick? You forfeited the right to my compassion the moment you decided my life was a risk worth taking for an affair, I said, walking out of the room. Your hour starts now. I went to my study, locked the door, and listened as the life we had built shattered into a million pieces. Update 1. The past 3 weeks have been a masterclass in crisis management. My initial calm has given way to a grim, methodical determination. Miss Evans, my lawyer, is a shark in a tailored suit. When I laid out the facts in her office, supported by my dated test results and a detailed timeline of Sarah's suspicious activities, her expression was one of controlled fury. She confirmed this wasn't just a divorce. It was a potential civil suit for battery and intentional infliction of emotional distress, and possibly even a criminal matter, depending on state laws regarding HIV disclosure. My first actions, under her guidance, were swift. Finances. I immediately had the court issue a temporary injunction to freeze all our major joint assets, including investment portfolios and a shared savings account. Sarah had a supplementary credit card on my primary account, which I canceled, citing the cardholder was no longer authorized. Her personal business account was her own, but I knew it didn't carry enough to sustain her lifestyle or the coming legal battle. The house. I filed for exclusive use of the marital home, a motion the court granted swiftly, given the circumstances of her departure and the evidence of endangerment. The locks were changed the day after she left. The disclosure letter. This was Miss Evans's masterstroke. She drafted a formal letter to the lawyer Sarah had scrambled to hire. The letter stated that as part of the legal discovery process and as a matter of urgent public health, Sarah was legally and ethically obligated to disclose her HIV status to any and all sexual partners from the past several years. It specifically named David Miller as a person of interest who must be notified immediately. That letter detonated a secondary bomb. Sarah's lawyer called Miss Evans, incandescent with rage, accusing us of harassment and intimidation. Miss Evans calmly replied that if Sarah failed to make the legally required notifications, we would be compelled to file a motion informing the court of this public health risk, a move that would not look favorable for his client. Checkmate. Sarah broke her own lawyer's only rule a day later. My phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was her, sobbing, hysterical. You're trying to ruin my life, Mark. You told David you're destroying everything. I haven't spoken to anyone, Sarah, I said, my voice flat. My lawyer informed your lawyer of your legal obligations. What you do with that is on you. This conversation is inappropriate. Direct all communication to Miss Evans. I hung up. The real fallout came a week later. I received a call from an unknown number. This time, it wasn't Sarah. Is this Mark Peterson? A woman's voice asked, strained and shaking. Yes, who is this? My name is Clara Miller. I'm David Miller's wife. My blood ran cold. I had never considered his wife. In my focus on Sarah's betrayal, I had compartmentalized her lover as a one-dimensional villain. I forgot he had a life, a family he was also betraying. We need to talk, she said, her voice cracking. David came home last week. He told me everything. He was forced to. He's positive, Mark. He got tested. He's HIV positive, and so am I. The weight of her words crushed the air from my lungs. Sarah's selfishness had become a contagion, spreading through families, destroying lives with callous indifference. Clara had been infected by her own husband, who had been infected by my wife. We spoke for an hour. We compared timelines, shared stories of our spouses' lies and gaslighting. It was a conversation of shared trauma, a horrific club with only 2 members. Her husband, it turned out, wasn't so lucky. Sarah had likely been positive for years, but David had contracted it from her more recently. He, in turn, had passed it to his unsuspecting wife. Sarah's little affair didn't just risk one life. It had actively claimed the health of 2 others. My resolve hardened from steel to diamond. This was no longer just about a broken marriage. It was about justice. Update 2. The legal battle has been as ugly as expected. Sarah's strategy, guided by her lawyer, was to paint her as the ultimate victim, a sick, terrified woman abandoned by a cruel, vindictive husband who was using his financial power to destroy her. They filed a motion for emergency spousal support, demanding an astronomical sum to cover her accustomed lifestyle, mounting legal bills and extensive future medical costs. Our response, crafted by Miss Evans, was brutal in its factual simplicity. We presented the medical timeline. My 2 negative tests, 3 months apart, definitively proved I was not the source of her infection. The financial records, credit card statements and bank records, showing her spending on hotels, dinners, and gifts that coincided with her affair. We subpoenaed David Miller's records, which corroborated the timeline. The endangerment claim. We submitted a detailed affidavit of my symptoms of seroconversion sickness, the doctor's visit, and the psychological torment of believing my wife had given me a fatal disease, only to discover the truth was an even more profound betrayal. The deposition from Clara Miller. The most powerful weapon. Clara, having filed for her own divorce, gave a sworn deposition detailing how she contracted HIV from her husband as a direct result of his affair with Sarah. The judge for the emergency support hearing was a no-nonsense older woman. She read through the filings, her expression growing sterner with every page. Sarah sat across the courtroom, attempting to look frail and small. Her lawyer argued that her illness was a marital condition that I was financially responsible for, regardless of its origin. He claimed my actions in freezing assets were financially abusive. Miss Evans stood up and calmly eviscerated their entire narrative. Your Honor, the petitioner did not contract a marital condition. She contracted an adulterous condition. She then knowingly concealed this condition and endangered my client's life for years. Her current financial difficulties are not the result of my client's actions, but are the direct consequence of the choices that led to the dissolution of this marriage and the infection of at least 2 other innocent parties. The judge's ruling was a crushing blow for Sarah. She was awarded a minimal amount of temporary support, barely enough to cover rent on a small apartment and basic necessities. The judge explicitly stated that the issue of long-term support for her medical condition would be heavily scrutinized in the final settlement, given the aggravating circumstances of how the illness was contracted and concealed. Defeated in court, Sarah and her family began a campaign of harassment. Her mother called me, weeping, accusing me of having no soul. Her sister sent me vitriolic emails. They tried to spin a narrative among our old friends that I had abandoned my sick wife in her hour of need. It didn't work. The truth, in all its horrifying detail, began to leak out. When people learned that her sickness was the result of a long-term affair that had also infected an innocent wife, the sympathy for Sarah evaporated. Friends I hadn't spoken to in months called to offer their support. My partners at work, to whom I'd confided the basics, created a protective circle around me. The final dirty trick was an anonymous call to my firm's ethics department, alleging that I was emotionally unstable and a liability to our clients. Fortunately, I had preemptively disclosed the situation to my managing partner. The complaint was dismissed as the malicious, unsubstantiated claim it was. It only served to further highlight Sarah's desperation. She wasn't a victim fighting for survival. She was an aggressor who had been caught and was now flailing, trying to inflict as much damage as she could on her way down. Final update. The divorce was finalized last month. It ended not with a dramatic courtroom showdown, but with a settlement reached during a grim all-day mediation. The writing was on the wall. Sarah's lawyer knew that if we went to trial, the judge would likely rule catastrophically against her. The evidence of financial infidelity, reckless endangerment, and bad faith tactics during the proceedings was overwhelming. Faced with the prospect of getting virtually nothing and potentially being ordered to pay my legal fees, she folded. The final settlement was a reflection of the reality she had created. Asset division. The division of marital assets was skewed heavily in my favor. I received 70% of all liquid assets and investments. The court recognized that a significant portion of marital funds had been dissipated in furtherance of her affair, and her conduct had egregiously violated the marital contract. The house. I bought out her 30% share of the house equity, allowing me to keep my home. Spousal support. This was her biggest loss. She received no long-term spousal support or alimony. The mediator was clear that no court would force a man to fund the medical treatments for an illness his spouse contracted during an affair, while simultaneously endangering his own life. She was awarded 1 year of minimal rehabilitative support, a token sum to assist in her transition to self-sufficiency. Legal fees. We each paid our own. For me, this was a victory. Life has moved on. The silence in my house is no longer heavy with tension, but filled with peace. I got tested again at the 9-month mark, and the result was the same. Negative. I have no words for the gratitude I feel for that outcome, a sheer fluke of biology or luck that I will never take for granted. I hear things through the grapevine. Sarah had to move back to her hometown to live with her parents. Her design business collapsed without the financial stability our marriage provided. She is grappling with her health, her reputation is in tatters, and she is reportedly consumed with a bitter resentment for the life she lost, a life she, herself, set on fire. David Miller's life was also immolated. His divorce from Clara was swift and brutal. She received the house, a majority of their assets, and substantial long-term support, with the court citing his reckless endangerment of her health. He lost his job in the fallout and is facing his own health and financial abyss. The revenge, if you can call it that, was not in a single, explosive act. It was in the cold, methodical application of logic and law. It was in showing her my negative test, a simple piece of paper that represented not just my health, but the irrefutable proof of her betrayal. She wanted to trap me in a tragedy of her making. Instead, I handed her a mirror and forced her to look at the consequences of her own choices. She didn't just lose a husband, she lost the protector, the provider, and the life she took for granted. She gambled with my life and lost her own. The satisfaction I feel is not joy. It is the profound, quiet relief of survival and the grim validation of justice served. The storm has passed. It's time to rebuild.